The coronavirus crisis has wreaked havoc globally. New threats have emerged as the world's political balance is tilted further east. So does the North Atlantic Treaty Organization still prove to be relevant in the midst of this changing global order? Well, my guest today is the NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg, who joins me now. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Secretary-General. Can I just first of all start off with the news that we've seen emerge in the last couple of days? That is that confirmation from Donald Trump that he is going to withdraw 9,000 troops from Germany. Now, this was first revealed, I think, in the Wall Street Journal on June 5th. When did you first hear about this news?
This was an issue I discussed with President Trump when we had a phone call last week. In that phone call, I stated very clearly that the presence of North America, of both US troops but also Canadian troops in Europe, is of importance for all of us, for Europe but also for North America. And therefore, what I welcome is that we have seen over the last years an increased US presence in Europe with more troops in Poland, leading a battle group there, with more presence in the Baltic countries, in the Black Sea region, and also elsewhere. But
doesn't it sound quite extraordinary that, you know, you as Secretary General of NATO find out in the press about these pretty dramatic cuts to troop numbers in Germany, rather than either being told in advance or indeed consulted about it? It's pretty insulting in some ways, isn't it?
Well, the issue of US presence in Europe is an issue that we have discussed over a long period of time within NATO, and in particular in my dialogue with the United States as a NATO allies. What the United States has made clear now is that no final decision has been taken about how and when this intention will be implemented.
But it doesn't send the best message, does it, about the alliance, this move? And it's part of an ongoing campaign, it almost seems like, by the US president to have a go at NATO. Don't you think that actually Donald Trump's presidency has done damage to NATO's reputation and indeed to the alliance?
My message is also that US presence in Europe is not only about protecting Europe, but it's also about projecting US power beyond Europe. We know that many of the US operations in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Africa, they come out from US bases in Europe. The US Africa Command is not in Africa, it's in Stuttgart in Germany. So again, now we have to have a conversation about this in NATO. What matters for me is that we maintain a significant presence of North America in Europe, because that's important both for Europe and North America.
Just moving on to my introduction and what you've just been talking about there, about the changing balance of threats. Of course, NATO was founded in many ways to keep the USSR in check. Do you now think, though, that China poses a greater military threat in many ways, but a greater threat to the Western world order than Russia does?
The rise of China is fundamentally changing the global balance of power. China will soon has the biggest economy in the world, and they already have the second largest defense budget. And China is investing heavily in new long-range military capabilities, missiles that can reach all NATO allies, Europe, modernizing their nuclear forces. And this is not about NATO moving into the South China Sea, but it is about the fact that China is coming closer to us with weapon systems that can reach us all, with increased Chinese presence in cyberspace, in the Arctic, in Africa, but also investing heavily in infrastructure in Europe. And NATO has to respond to that. And it's extremely important that North America and Europe stand together, because together we are half of the world's military might and economic might. So if anything, the rise of China makes it even more important to maintain the bond between North America and Europe, the transatlantic bond.
You talk about not moving there into the South China Sea. But why not? I mean, as you pointed out, NATO are involved in parts of Africa, in Afghanistan. Why not, in some ways, meet that threat head on if it is potentially in the South China Sea and see NATO expand its capabilities in East Asia?
Because NATO is a regional alliance, our responsibility is to protect what we call the North Atlantic area, Europe and North America. But we need a global approach, and we need to fully understand the consequences of the rise of China. Some NATO allies, of course, operate in the South China Sea, the United States, United Kingdom, France is also a Pacific nation. So there are several allies which are operating there. But I think it's good for everyone that that's not a NATO mission, not a NATO under NATO command. But we need to adapt our presence here in Europe to be able to respond in a coordinated way.
Now, the coronavirus pandemic, in many ways, Secretary-General, has caused enormous damage in terms of deaths and indeed damage to economies across the world. And it's a reminder, isn't it, that actually something like coronavirus or COVID-19 could be used as a weapon. We've heard about biological warfare in the past. So
first of all, we have no indications that the coronavirus is man-made. But of course, the pandemic itself is a reminder of the potential danger related to biological warfare. And as we now invest more in modernizing our military capabilities, we have also invested more in capabilities that can deal with chemical and biological attacks. We are doing more exercises, and we are stepping up the efforts to deal with this kind of crisis or warfare.
And just very finally, shouldn't this be the moment in which actually maybe NATO steps aside and the EU steps in with its own army, with its own military capability to actually see off these threats?
I welcome EU efforts on defense, but they cannot replace NATO. We have to remember that 80% of NATO's defense expenditure comes from non-EU allies. So yes, we welcome more EU efforts on defense, but also knowing that close to 60% of the population in NATO don't live in an EU country. Of course, EU cannot replace NATO, but NATO and EU can complement each other, and we welcome more EU efforts on defense.
Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary-General of NATO, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Euronews. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much for having me.